Hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining our webinar. I'd like to first introduce myself and the other TeachStarter staff who are online with us today. My name is Natalie. I'm the U.S. Resource Production Manager at TeachStarter. I'm also joined by some of the TeachStarter team who are here to answer any questions you may have. Our panel today will not be interacting with you during the webinar, but when we're finished, please head over to our Teacher Live Facebook group to chat with other teachers about the transition back to school this fall. Also, Phyllis and Rick will be available to chat on Twitter. Just head over to @TeachStarter. So today's conversation is about the transition back to the classroom from remote and hybrid learning. We know that teachers are coming into this 2021-22 school year from a variety of circumstances and will all encounter their own challenges. As we try to reset and reestablish traditional modes of learning, we also need to be mindful of our students' experiences and the social, emotional, and academic implications. To help me talk about this, I've got a fantastic panel of educators and administrators here today. Welcome to James Allrich. James is the principal at Argyle Magnet Middle School in Montgomery County, Maryland. James's dedication to equity, excellence, and the innovative use of technology was highlighted when he was named Montgomery County Public School ESOL Principal of the Year in 2019. We have Phyllis Fagell. She's a licensed clinical counselor, author, and journalist who's worked in both public and private schools with students in grades K to 12. She currently works as a counselor at a K to 8 school in Washington, D.C. Phyllis is the author of Middle School Matters and a frequent contributor to news organizations focusing on counseling, parenting, and education. I would also like to welcome Rick Wormeli. Rick is an experienced classroom teacher and one of the first nationally board certified teachers in America. An award-winning author from Meet Me in the Middle and other books on education best practices, Rick's currently working on a new book on ethical grading practices. So welcome, you guys. We're so excited that you guys are here.
Welcome.
Oh, it's an honor. Thanks for having us.
So we've all been living 6 feet apart, and that has clearly had an impact on our kids. Not only our kids, but also the teachers, the administrators, and on all families. I want to start by checking in on these different groups in our schools. How are they coping, and what are they dealing with as we transition back into the classroom? I'm going to go first to you, Phyllis. Can you talk about what's going on in students' brains? Why is this loosening of pandemic regulations something that we should be thinking about as we enter into this next school year?
I think that in your introduction, one of the points you made that's so true is that everyone is coming back from a very different experience. And so everyone's brains will have been impacted in different ways. And I think the one thing we need to keep in mind is that we have to cast aside any assumptions. Kids might have been through quite a great deal of trauma, but actually be functioning well. And there could be kids who have never had a setback in their life and have had all the creature comforts at home, but have a difficult time coming back to school. And I really believe the same is true for teachers, for administrators, for everyone working in the school setting. And I'm hoping that when we come back, we all press the reset button, that we take the emotional temperature in the room, that we let go of any resentments or any anger that maybe somebody had toward a colleague who they felt didn't hold their weight during remote learning, that we forgive ourselves if we feel we fell short, and that we turn our attention to starting fresh and meeting kids wherever they are.
Now, I just wanted to make sure I jumped right in. I thought that was a good point that Phyllis made about kind of letting go. One of the things that we're doing at Argyle is really having to let go of some of our previous practices that really didn't mean much, right? We had a hoodie policy that was like a really big deal in our building. We had an earbud policy that was a really big deal in our building. And this summer with my instructional leadership team, we've been spending time looking at those practices to identify what are the real purposes. And as we come back, what does it actually mean? What we don't want is to put our teachers or our staff or our students in these places where they're going to be combating each other for rules and policies that are antiquated, that don't make sense, and then as we're coming back, that we're focusing on what's most important. And the reality is the pandemic and its all of the challenges that we know has existed through it has brought that to light for us, and that has been one of the positive things that has come out of it, at least in my school and in many other schools. I would say around the country, as we're revisiting some of these practices and policies to really hit the reset button. In the middle school, we have really only one grade that's been in the building. Right? We have two grades that hasn't been in the building, so we have a great opportunity here, and we really want to capitalize and seize on that opportunity.
James, I would also like to ask you, so with all of that, what do you expect teachers are going to be feeling as they're going back into the classroom this fall?
Yeah, I think teachers are going to be anxious. I think they're going to be excited. I think they're going to be, a little worrisome. I think, you know, we're going to teachers with various levels of, emotional stress. You're gonna find them all over the place, right? And what I've come to find, and just in my, when the teachers were able to return just for a short time in the spring, is that those things just level out over time. And they level out because teachers are able to talk to each other. They're able to share, hey, this is what I'm feeling. But they're also able to see that some of those things that they were really worried about is not as intense as they thought it would be. Um, and just being in the space, being around kids, being around the thing that they love to do, just kind of just have a lot of those worries just kind of wither away. So although you will see a lot of intense emotions in the beginning, for either way, just coming back or just afraid of what this pandemic has done, I think those things just kind of wither away and just kind of level out once teachers are engaged in what they're most passionate about, and that is children.
Definitely. I know that all of my teacher friends, they definitely, when the pandemic started and continued to go on and on, that was the big thing they continued to say. It was just that, look, I just want to be back in the classroom with my students. Like they couldn't have those relationship building moments that you can have in the classroom. Even if you are all wearing masks, you still can have that make that emotional connection a lot easier, I feel like, than even across the computer screen. There's something about that computer screen that really causes the walls to be built in a sense. You can't really make those same emotional connections.
I think, too, going back to what James said about reevaluating some of the policies and some of the practices that really are long overdue to reevaluate, I'm thinking about that even in terms of how we think about space or how we think about the classroom, because that has all been completely upended, which is also an opportunity. I talked yesterday to Annie Murphy Paul, who just wrote a book called The Extended Mind. And it really is about how we learn. And she talks about how we learn through the brain, yes, but we also learn through gestures. She was sharing that, somebody else was actually sharing with me that when they were teaching kids really complex terms, like a word that's a scientific term for kids who are learning English as a second language, that if they paired it with a gesture, they would have an easier time learning it. But she also talks about how we use space, where we sit, the kind of spaces we create in the classrooms and in our homes to foster learning. And then the last piece is relationships. We learn through relationships through the people we're connecting with as we're absorbing the material. And one of the ideas we were talking about for the classroom that I really liked was this idea of having an imagination corner or a play corner, as opposed to just a straight up calm down corner, but a space that's really designated to recharge in a way maybe we haven't thought about recharging in the classroom in a positive way, not you need a break way, but in a, you know what, let's work this idea out, let's play with it, and do things like have kids move along a number line to learn about math, but to actually use their bodies, move their bodies, use those gestures, carve out spaces, have more recess too. I know James has been trying to figure out a way to incorporate more recess into the middle school day, which is not typical. But I think we need to think about recess differently too. We tend to think about it as a break from learning, but as a counselor, I can tell you that's when some really significant learning is happening. Conflict resolution, debating an idea, defending an idea. And because kids are rusty, because they haven't had as much practice with all of those face-to-face interactions and things like perspective taking, because sensitivity will be so off the charts when they return, I think we want to make sure that we have as much unstructured playtime as we do learning time, because it's one and the same.
I was gonna say, I feel like that was a handoff to me. I appreciate that, Phyllis. But yeah, with the recess piece, when students came back, um, and just partially, and we saw this over the summer as well. We were struggling and thinking kids are gonna just want to be on their devices because they're so used to being on their devices. And what we saw was the total opposite, right? Kids want to connect. That's actually why so many of them are on their devices. They're talking, engaging friends, but not actually able to do that in person. And what we saw during recess time was kids just hanging, playing, talking, debating, walking, right? Just doing those things with others, with their peers that they weren't able to do in the pandemic space. So, for us, we made sure we incorporated recess not only when we came back, we did it during summer school, right? We thought that was really, really important. We've been talking a lot about that for what's going to happen in the fall and how we're going to just make it part of our day. Before this, it was kind of optional. We had the option. We want to make it part of our day, so kids actually have that free space to continue to engage. And again, that's a very important learning time when they get to learn each other, learn about themselves, and have that freedom to do those things that we oftentimes do not allow inside the classroom.
I would love to go back for just a moment. We were talking about the teachers, James. You were talking about teachers coming in and how they would be feeling. And I want to talk for a second about brand new teachers or second year teachers. And I would love to go to you, Rick, and ask if you're a new teacher walking into your classroom or a second year teacher where your first year you were doing remote learning the entire time and you're walking into a classroom where kids are just now shifting back. What do you feel like that would look like? And what are some things that they need to be thinking about as they're transitioning into this new world, kind of going into a classroom?
Well, the first thing is they should give themselves a daily allotment of 12 whopping mistakes per day and not feel bad. But if they get to 13, then they can feel bad for like 20 minutes and then they crawl out of that sorrow because they're very conscientious, they want to do right, and they come back fresh the next day. They just need to know that they're probably going to have at least 12 huge mistakes and get over it. It's just a par for the course. And that the second year of doing this thing that they're doing this year, they'll be 200% better. The other thing they need to do is they need to really hook up with somebody that they respect. It doesn't have to be somebody who teaches the same grade level or same topic. Somebody they respect in education, kind of an educational touchstone. Now there are famous people, that I refer to that think, oh, what would they say? I read their books and things. That's fine. It can be somebody though right there in the faculty or at a school next door where they can vent and they can be themselves without fear of judgment. But the other thing is this, I would hope that they realize that school is a collaboration with students, not something we do to them. And it's more than fine. It's preferred. And seasoned veterans know this. And if they're not doing it, they should do more of it. That they need to say, I'm overwhelmed. I know that this is developmentally appropriate. I'm not sure how to do that. I wonder if a few of you would give me some suggestions on how we can make that work in our community here in the classroom. I would like to have classroom protocols where people know exactly where materials go. I would like to be able to give you more feedback, but does anybody know of an app that I can use to give you more feedback in a timely manner? And we can explore apps together, that kind of thing. And I think when you realize it's a collaboration, you feel more comfortable and not as overwhelmed, and that you've got that support system to do it. What does that look like? Dream big. Do all the things that you thought would be meaningful. Is the whole reason why you went into teaching, and go for it and take all your risks. It's kind of like make all your mistakes right now, and instead of waiting to make your mistakes later and just being so worried that you make perfect get in the way or inhibit progress. And you don't want to do that. You want to just show that you're growing. And man, it would be so good if somebody could help you take a snapshot of yourself now and then visit with you every month and say, look how things have changed already. Because sometimes we're lost in the daily urgencies and we don't see the bigger picture of how you actually have changed. And nothing motivates like that perception of progress. I was once here and now I'm here. Oh, this is 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, but it is progress. And
Mhm.
that would be a wonderful thing. And then literally just saying, look, I need practical tips on this. Would you sit with me? And finding that kind heart, it could be somebody, again, at a totally different grade level and subject, but they're just good people. They're decent, they're kind, they're willing to be patient with others, and you don't feel silly asking what seems like a dumb question or an obvious question. Uh, you feel safe with them.
As Rick, as you're talking, I started saying to myself, "Whoa, this is not just a lesson for teachers, right? I mean, as an administrator, almost would give the exact same advice, right? If you're around
Yeah,
people
yeah,
who are uh, afraid to, tell you when you're wrong, or tell you that this is, not the right way to go, you're going to find yourself in trouble, right? But to that point, I think, Rick, I think you're hitting on, this piece around being able to make mistakes and being able to not just recover from it, but to build that level of resilience. It makes me think a lot about Elena Aguiar's book, Onward, right?
yeah,
And such a book around just really cultivating emotional resilience. And if there's anything, I know one of the things that we do in our building for all of our new teachers or teachers who are just new to our building is that we really spend time developing and talking through this particular text, but really around this emotional resilience. How do you make mistakes? How do you ask for help? Right? How do you say I don't know? How do you open it up to the students and learn from them? Right? That even though you may be in teacher position, that the teachers are teaching you, right? And that does require humility. That does require a level of openness and vulnerability, Phyllis, as you brought up, for our teachers. And I would say the same thing for our administrators, right? As we're growing, because I'm also thinking about not just new teachers, but I'm also thinking there are administrators who just started in the pandemic. Because somebody else
yeah,
left, and then they jumped in last year, and they're going to meet their school community face to face for the first time
yeah,
in August. So, I mean, I would say the same exact rules apply.
yeah,
Same exact rules apply. So
Yeah, trying to build that culture in not only your classroom, but a whole campus as well. To your point, James, you're exactly right. Those new administrators coming in, because you don't know the culture of that school yet. So, yeah, really trying to jump in and ask those questions. And I know when I was an administrator, I loved when the teachers would come to me and give me advice and say, hey, you say this, but you need to look at it from a teacher's perspective. You say this, however, you've forgotten when you were in the classroom, and it's not this idyllic place that you're trying to make it out to be. So definitely building that culture in the school, to where teachers can come and talk to administrators and give administrators advice as well, and kind of having those conversations, and being open enough to receive those conversations is great. So, I would love to take some time to talk about social and emotional learning. So, we have students who've been in isolation for over a year, some who've been in the classroom with very strict COVID precaution measures, also some hybrid students. And they're all going to be having to transition in these different ways. So, James, we can expect our students will have lost some of those vital social skills. What can teachers do to quickly build back those social skills in their students?
I guess one quick story for me that comes to mind is during summer school, and the same exact thing happened actually when we came back in the spring. Kids want to be friends and they don't know how to do it. They don't know how to connect, and sometimes it's like hitting somebody and running. And sometimes people don't want to be touched or don't want to be hit, and these things then blow up into something else. And what it reminded me of, which was very, very quick, very quickly, we had two students get into a scuffle that um, could have really been avoided, and several other students knew what's going to happen, almost planned, if you will. And it was really, really quickly. It told me as an administrator, I and our team don't have the relationships we had because that wouldn't have happened prior to COVID, right? Not that kids wouldn't have gotten into a scuffle, but this many kids wouldn't have known about it and we not know about it, right? Because we were that in tune, that connected with our kids. So I would say the first thing is to first get connected with your students, right? And that can mean all kinds of things, right? Build those relationships, rebuild those relationships. Um, Whether or not, and for us, our tool we use oftentimes are community circles. So whether or not that's through community circles, whether or not that is, carving out some time in your classroom to build community, like be intentional about it. So people are able to make those connections. So they're not looking in, during recess in the field trying to figure out how to make friends. I already have some because you and I are in the same class and you shared something that I really agreed with, and I didn't get a chance to say it during that period. But let me say it to you now while we're out here. Um, so one of those big ways is going to be, reconnecting with students and students, but I would also say staff and students, right? I think it's going to be really, really, really critical. That's one of the things I know I'm really, really looking forward to is to rebuilding those relationships. But every class, math, English, science, social studies, PE, all the way down, should be really, really intentional about how we build a community in these spaces, so that way we're able to help our students move through this really difficult transition.
I would just add that I was told early in my career that when you want to do social emotional stuff and make people feel comfortable, you always practice new behaviors in short chunks. So we might talk about it for 5 to 10 minutes or whatever we're going to do. So there's a clear vision. We might only do it for 2 minutes, whatever it is. But then the next day we do it for 5. The next day we do it for 7. And that in those situations, we make sure they're not high stakes with grades attached, that they are free to be themselves without worry that it'll be held against them, whatever sporadic success they have in that interaction. And, we have done the fishbowl, where we have a group on the outside studying inside. We've looked at video clips and things. How is that sitting with you if you were there, that kind of thing. We've had those discussions. And I think rehearsal a little bit, you're more fortified when you really want to interact. So we might just rehearse some of the things we might say and do in response situations. Actually helps people become fortified. And that means they have a confidence now, rather than, I don't know if you guys have ever called somebody when you're really angry, like a company or a restaurant or something, and you kind of rehearse your mind. Okay, make sure you say this, make sure you say this. Or even when you're sitting at a restaurant or someplace and the server's going to come over and ask, and you're like, I don't want to fumble. I want to make sure that I say this smoothly. There's an anxiety just in that. And just rehearsing that without it being the real moment, but again, in short chunks, might go a long way.
I think that teachers tend to underestimate how many concrete strategies kids need to initiate a dialogue, to enter a conversation. I have so many students I consider poised, well-liked, surrounded by friends who will come to me and say, I'm the most awkward person on the planet. I stand there on the blacktop and they're talking and I have no idea what to do. And it's so awkward. And what do I do? And so we might actually break it down and say, well, how about this? How about you listen without saying anything, maybe for 2 or 3 minutes until you can pick up on the thread. Maybe they're talking about sports. Maybe they're talking about how hard the history test was. And then ask someone a question related to that topic. Everyone loves answering questions about themselves. And that kid will come back and say, oh my God, that works. Like that worked. And it's what you were saying, Rick. It's about bolstering their confidence, giving them some tools because they're so lost and they don't feel like they're being infantilized. They actually feel like somebody is, handing them a hammer to deal with the nail. It feels very reassuring. Similarly, I would say that teachers can be really thoughtful about how they pair students for assignments, where they sit them, how they group them, who they recommend for, maybe a social skills group or an anxiety group if a school counselor offers something along those lines. But setting kids up for success, setting them up to look good in front of their peers. If there's a kid who has terrible really struggles with ADHD and is often off task and might embarrass themselves in class by, pretending to fly like Superman or doing things that the classmates think he's too old to be doing at that point, the teacher can actually find ways to give that kid a role in which they'll shine, in which that dynamism will add to the discussion. And kids really do pick up on how teachers are treating kids in the class. So they can give somebody who's struggling a huge assist simply by showing some approval and some appreciation for that child.
But to James's point about building community and all this stuff, teachers are going to have to be assured by leadership that they might actually be proactive in doing that, which means the teachers are thinking this: I can't teach my lessons then, my curriculum, because I'm doing community building. And one of the things we want to get past is that it's zero sum. If I do community building, I can't do academics. No, you can do these together. There are very good ways to do that. You're not forsaking one. And by building that community, you are empowering kids very specifically, practically. You are empowering kids to be able to do academia successfully. And if you don't do it, you're going to play a lot of catch up. I got to go back and reteach, remediate. These kids just aren't going to learn it. So it's too easy to slip into deficit thinking and blaming the child for his lack of learning. But you weren't doing that proactive stuff that spoke to these very real needs. So I want leaders to reassure teachers we will support the community building. And I want teachers to see it as not to you do one to the exclusion of others, to think of the creative ways you can combine them together. It's going to be so much more hopeful and doable if they see it like that.
Yeah, Rick, I think you bring such a great point there. I mean, you brought up earlier fish bowls. Great
Yeah.
way to build community, right? Great way to hear student voice,
Yeah.
and the students rotate in and out of those fish bowls and being able to kind of provide that feedback. It's just awesome. And I think Phyllis, you talked about giving students either sentence starters or having time where you say, for this 60 seconds, you're the only one that's going to talk. Your partner B, now you have 60 seconds, you're the only one to talk. Right? These are tools that you can use, obviously, to bolster the academics in any class, math, science, social studies, and you can still build community at the exact same time, right? So having those tools in your toolkit, in your back pocket, and also being very intentional about including them in your instruction. 10-2, right? Shouldn't be talking more than 10 minutes before you give people, a time, 2 minutes to actually process. I mean, there are many strategies out there, right? But when you look at those strategies in context of building community, then it's not one or the other. So to your point, Rick, I think that's really, really important.
It's those turn and talk moments that you can have in the classroom that are so quick in the middle of instruction that are so important for students. Not only their speaking and listening skills that they're developing, but like you guys were saying, those social skills, those getting a student to understand you're not always going to be the speaker. Sometimes you do just have to stop and listen to what the other one is saying, and then how to build off of that in a conversation situation. I think oftentimes those beginning teachers, they don't realize that social skills have to be taught. They're not just something that students just kind of develop. That it's definitely something that teachers have to physically teach students how to build those conversations and how to stop and listen and build off of other people's conversations as well. And those turn and talk situations that you do in the middle of a lesson, those definitely help with those. So to Yo's point, you're exactly right. Building that into the curriculum is so easy. So many strategies you can do that with. So I would love, Phyllis, for you to talk for just a moment about chronic stress. We know that our students are going to be coming into this school year more stressed probably than they have been. All the data is showing that stress and anxiety in everyone through this pandemic has risen. So I would love for you for a moment to just kind of talk about what does chronic stress look like? What do teachers need to be looking for in their students that are going to help them to see that their students are stressed? And then on top of that, what are some of the strategies that we can use with those students to get them to learn to focus again?
That's a dissertation and a half. Go, Phyllis, go.
You got it, Phyllis.
Well, I think that actually they don't even have to be looking for signs of chronic stress. They're there. Everybody is chronically stressed. Everybody's nervous system has been overtaxed. And maybe that's actually a good thing that we can start from that assumption and start from the assumption that it will show up in lots of different ways. For one kid, they might be fidgety. Another kid might act out and be more aggressive. Another child might have a really hard time attending to a lesson for even a few minutes. Somebody else might be very quick if somebody accidentally bumps into them to give them a sharp elbow back. So we're going to see it show that chronic stress manifest in all different kinds of ways. And one of the most powerful things we can do at the start of the year for students is to tell them that, is to say, you're all recovering from a really hard situation. You're still in this situation and you might be feeling more sensitive. You might be feeling stressed. You might have a harder time paying attention. Things that used to be easy for you might suddenly be more difficult than they were in the past. That's normal. That's to be expected. Be patient with yourself. Be patient with one another. And let's be really creative about what we can. I have a puppy climbing on me right now. Let's be really creative about what we can do to problem solve and help you be whatever I hesitate to use the word do your best, because I think that for perfectionists in particular, that's an impossible task. They can never do their best. Their best is unreachable. But to help kids establish what are reasonable, attainable expectations, what do we need to do to break this down into bite-sized chunks that you can do? How can you demonstrate your learning in a way that allows you to show me what you have absorbed, what you still need to accrue knowledge in, and how I can best support you in that effort? But there are going to be some situations where kids are struggling more than others, where maybe they haven't bathed in a while, or you've noticed they're wearing the same clothing every day. They have huge bags under their eyes. They seem depressed. Maybe another kid has reported that they're concerned about them because they've made a self-harm statement. And in those situations, we really need to be making sure that we're that bridge. I know teachers get very anxious about attending to emotional distress in students. It's not their training. It's not something they have time to do typically. It's also something they're not trained to do. But to really empower teachers to recognize that they don't have to have the answers. They just have to be that conduit, the person who gets that child to the counselor. And I've said this before, but I really fervently believe that it is not enough to email that kid's counselor and say, hey, can you check in with this kid? They drew a disturbing picture, or I'm concerned about them. But to actually walk that child to the counselor's office, make the introduction, and help them tell their story, because that is the most intimidating part for the kid. The kid knows you, the teacher. The kid very well may not know that counselor who has 400 kids in their caseload. So just being that conduit, it is a little bit of extra work, but it can make all of the difference in terms of whether or not that child then gets the support that they need.
And I would just add to the dissertation that the adults have to be self-aware of their own stress, of their own triggers, and if they're not, they can create even more stress, more anxiety in kids. So many of our staff members, may be coming back into the building stressed, worried, whatever, for whatever reason. And I think there are thousands of reasons why you can be, but to be self-aware, right, and to know when, okay, I need a break, or when I need to, we call it tag out, right? When we feel like, oh, this is escalating, it's time for me to tag out. Let's bring another adult in, and then, we're able to find some strategies to make sure that we are able to support our students. We can't if we haven't supported ourselves. So I'll just add that piece to the stress.
And that is so powerful too, in the same way that admitting you don't know what you're doing as a teacher at times is powerful, and you're asking the kid to be the expert for a moment. To tell a kid, you know what, I'm really stressed. I'm going to take 5 minutes and just do some deep breathing because I can tell I'm going to be reactive in this moment. You're not only taking care of yourself, you're teaching kids how to self-regulate. And kids all the way through high school are not always good at labeling their feelings. And if they can't label their feelings, they don't know how to solve their problem. And so that is another way that I think teachers can give an assist. You look frustrated right now, or I can tell something's bothering you. Let's talk about it. And if you can drill down to maybe they're feeling anxious and then drill further and find out they're anxious because they don't feel prepared for a test, well, then maybe it would help them if you carved out time to meet before school to help them study or figure out what they need to study. Whereas if they say, I'm feeling upset, and I'm feeling upset because I'm lonely. I walk into the cafeteria and I've never been in this school before and I don't know anyone here and I just feel adrift. Well, then maybe the solution is you have lunch with that student for a day and you invite a couple of other kids to join you and you help them make some connections with other kids in the building.
So there's been quite the dramatic disruption to the ways that we've gone about education. And I think we need to talk about how those established methods fit with this moment. So over the past year, many of our students have been able to take a more passive approach to their learning. James, what are some routines and procedures we need to think about as we try to re-engage students in a more traditional school setting?
Coming off of Zoom, one of the things, well, whichever software you were using, right? So coming off of distance learning, a lot of our teachers quickly, at least in my building and some other buildings not so quickly, start to learn strategies to engage students. And one of the things that we love to do is send kids into breakout rooms, right? And you can do that in a kind of moment's notice. The difficult part was trying to get to all those different breakout rooms. One of the things as we get back into our physical space is we want to continue that level of engagement of students being able to engage each other, right? The nice thing is you now maybe give people, at the beginning of the year, a color, a number. We've done things like your clock buddies, right? Where you've already set and you're intentional about the level of engagement that's going to happen in your classroom. That's going to be very, very critical, right? That you're not spending the majority of the time talking, that you're letting students engage each other and talk. Strategies around how we are going to, and I think we mentioned this one earlier, provide some time for students to do some community building with each other and making sure that is intentional and kind of structural, whether or not that's in how you do your engagement or whether or not that is something that you just do at the beginning, at the end, that kind of stuff, opening and closings, things of that nature. I think it's really, 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 really important that our teachers are thinking ahead and really planning ahead for this level of engagement in person. Some of the things that we did in the virtual space, we're going to be able to replicate. Some things we won't. But I do think it's critical that we look at the things we used to do and say, are these things still valuable in this space now that we're coming back and now that we're looking at this a little differently? We're going to have staff members who may still decide to say, hey, I want to continue to use this LMS. And in my particular building, we are, as a school, looking at it from the perspective of this LMS was great. We want to continue to use that as a space where students can get all of their makeup work. If you're absent, you know where to go for every class. There used to be this structure where if you went to teacher A's class, he had folders. You went to teacher B, she had, maybe Google Docs. You went to teacher C, they had, some other structure. Maybe it was just written on the board. As a school, we've been looking at structures that's going to be consistent, so that way so students are able to say, I know how to get the lesson, whether or not it's a day that I missed or I just checked out, although I was physically in the building, physically in the space, I can access that lesson in this exact same spot and don't have to learn it 8 different times for my 8 different classes. Being intentional in your class, and what I'm talking about is also being intentional in your school. And that maybe you're not the principal, but maybe you're the team leader. Maybe you're part of the 8th grade team or the 6th grade team. You can bring that as a suggestion. So that way students are getting these similar experiences to do things like, again, access the lesson or to, how they particularly engage. We want those things to be consistent. So that's one less thing kids have to learn all over again in 8 different spaces.
Perfect. And so, Rick, I would love to talk for just a moment about grading and grade retentions.
Huh. Just one moment, huh?
Another dissertation.
Another big one. We're seeing that grade retentions are significantly higher from this last school year because of the struggles of the pandemic and the remote learning. So, what can teachers be doing to support those students on an emotional level?
Well, it's interesting. My first thought is, why the heck are you doing grade retentions? Knock it off. We have overwhelming evidence that grade retentions in middle school, high school do not work. You are actually doing more harm, more damage by doing that. But what you need to do is obviously provide the support. So over the summer and the ensuing year, change the instructional design. And you might be, looking at, hey, maybe we should do a heck of a lot more redos and for full credit and providing support. Maybe we should provide some mentoring along the way, peer tutoring programs and so on. Maybe e-portfolios and digital portfolios that follow you more than 1 year. Here's your science portfolio through high school or through middle school, your math portfolio, your fitness portfolio, your computer coding portfolio. And whatever summer or year you are, you demonstrate competence, you're given full credit. And knock it off with this uniform timeline and a mile wide, inch deep curriculum. Bob Marzano, way back probably 18 years ago, and it's even worse today because we have more curriculum, was talking about he's got all this compelling evidence that shows it takes to grade 22 to teach everything we tell the public and people who pay tuition for private independent schools of the material we claim to teach through grade 12. So we need another 10 years to do justice to everything we were supposed to be teaching. So the idea that you would march lockstep behind a uniform timeline, no, I am calling for everybody and every school to be gently insubordinate with the school's master schedule and design. If they need more time, less time, whatever. But it comes from a place, and Phyllis has heard me say this before, and maybe James, I don't know, but I'm really promoting this idea of compassion before curriculum, grace before accountability. And the idea that I'm going to find a variety of stepping stones for you to take and supports, or timeline differences, or mentoring, or reiterations. The goal is that you learn it, not you learn it by the one arbitrary calendar date. So I get emails every single week, all through 2020, and then of course now in 2021 of, hey, we've got 81% increase in Fs. So these people are all failing. I'm going, whoa, you need to relook at your grading practices and your instructional design. And you are still imposing an imperfect lockstep system on something where that went out the window in terms of effectiveness and efficacy for the students. So it's time to think outside the box and take advantage of this, tornado of a school year, and try to say, oh, now we can have some things that we knew were there and growing, now see the sunlight, and let's reform this. So let's have grading policies that instill hope, not despair. And let's really focus on the descriptive feedback so they own their learning and they develop that and excuses and give them the tools to do it. But then let's also give teachers the tools to have that wide repertoire and be able to respond. Like a teacher's going to feel very threatened if they only have one or two ways to teach or one or two ways to assess something. But our situation now requires diversity in your repertoire. I need to have professional agility. Otherwise, I'll be threatened by everybody who asks me to teach a kid who's struggling with something, and I don't have the skill set to do that. So now I get my ego is invoked, and now it gets me, demoralized and all that different stuff. So I'm going to ask everybody, if you're having all these grade retentions, there is a much larger thing going on. It's not something we need to do to students. It's something we need to do with ourselves and our system of grading, but also differentiation or responsive teaching. To be mindful that we teach in the way students learn, and it's not a gotcha enterprise. It's not about documenting, and it's certainly when you give assessment or feedback, it should never be an indictment. It should be data we gather to inform next steps and help the student monitor learning and gain in that. So we could look at specific grading practices if you want, but the question is this accurate, equitable, and ethical? And are we giving students a safe place to wrestle with new material and new learning and new normalcies? Or everything's kind of out of whack. without it being high stakes held against them as they do it. So antiquated grading practices are the things that are causing the grade retentions. And the idea that you're going to limit yourself to the same school calendars are the things you do. And you're not thinking outside the box. Like, here's another example. A lot of teachers know you have to take the test. It's irrelevant if they take the test or do the project. They have to present evidence of the learning. So if they come up with an alternative way to present the same evidence, hallelujah. Basically, run, Barry, run if you're into the Flash. That's the goal, is advocacy, not adversary. All right, as we're doing this. So I would want kids to realize you will not be humiliated ever by me, nor will I let you humiliate yourself. This is a safe place for you to be you as you do that. And I'm going to prove that to them daily. But I'm not going to invoke grading policies that make it high stakes either. There is recoverability. Yes, right now, you've got, grades are temporary positions in one continuum in a progression towards the standard. They're not in cement. So if you don't know it now when you take the test or when report cards come out, but you later come to know it, that's glorious. Let's do it. Let me submit a grade change report form. It's never set in stone. So this idea of, grades that are recoverable versus unrecoverable, this is where you cross the line and you have no pedagogical leg to stand on. There's a lot out there on hopeful grading practices versus despairing. And if you make a kid throw it on the ball and go home, then there's nothing left to lose. And they will act up and it'll be a problem. And I got to say, we need to look in the mirror when that's happening, not blame the child. So that's my initial thought. But let me tell you how I really feel.
Where I come from, Rick, we call it a mic drop. That's it. That's it. What else is there to say? That's it. It's a mic drop.
Well, I think people do a superficial knee-jerk response to grading. And once again, it becomes about control and not about learning and student growth, and it should be. So if I give you a different prism or different lens, then it'll open all these doors that previously were closed. But if you keep seeing it about control and accountability, and I have to get you and your little dog Toto too, that it's about shaping them up, then you're not going to see the learning and growth side of grading that needs to happen right now. So I hope people would do a deep dive into grading practices and then look at their hypocrisies. For example, they say all grades should be accurate. Everybody agrees on that, right? But then look at all these things you do that make a grade knowingly false. And so now, what if I were to work in alignment with my beliefs? My behaviors and policies were the same as my beliefs. You find new energy, new meaningfulness, and you're not demoralized. But when you are working askew from your virtues and values, you're way more exhausted. You're demoralized. And it's really hard to persevere when you're faced with all the challenges, logistically, emotionally, instructionally, with all that stuff, and morally to some degree. So I'm asking teachers and principals to go back and look at the purpose of grades, the hopefulness of grades, and then go, now let's live up to that rather than hide behind, I'm sorry, the technology does allow us to do it. Buffalo bagels. Of course it does. I'm calling you out. That's nonsense. You decide your philosophy first, then you bend technology to support it. You never subordinate your pedagogy that's so effective in your instructional practice because you don't think tech can do it. This is the future we used to dream about. You can do all these hopeful practices on Excel. So if your LMS and your software can't even do Excel, you are wasting taxpayer money and planet Earth's oxygen. I'm just saying.
Come on, who's going to go after that? Come on.
I want Rick's energy.
I'll stop. You guys jump in.
Go ahead, Phyllis. You got it.
The reason that makes sense, all of that, and nobody can say that as eloquently as you just did, Rick, but in all the years I've worked with kids, I have never seen someone perform better on an assessment because they think the stakes are high.
Yes.
We're cutting kids off at the knees for no reason whatsoever. So I agree with everything you just said, although I don't have to execute on it.
Are we teaching so that kids learn? Are we teaching merely to document where they are and how they fall short? It is a fundamental, huge difference in your whole approach. Even how you talk to children about their performance, it affects it.
Yeah. believe it or not, Rick, I mean, there's so many things that you're talking about. I mean, and I've seen some of your outstanding videos on this. But believe it or not, I mean, some of our schools, and I admit we are a little bit behind the eight ball here. We recently, in the pandemic, got to the space where we were like, please, no more due dates and deadlines. We just did away with them,
Right.
right? But I remember watching your video years ago about deadlines.
But
Artificial.
wait, if you take that away from teachers, I've been used to using grades for coercion and bribery and punishment and discipline. You have to replace it with something of equal or greater practicality, or teachers won't find it credible. So, what
Mm,
that means is we have to put tools in teachers' hands. How do you cultivate responsibility, maturity, respect for deadlines, executive function, things like that? Otherwise, they'll just rely on the grade book to do that for them because that's all they have. So I would never want to take that away without replacing it with something that was even more practical and actually far more effective in the long run. So just make sure you do both those.
yeah. So we during the one of the big conversations we had is what is it we're not going back to?
Yeah, I like that.
During the pandemic, and the grading was one of the big pieces that we were talking about.
Yeah.
Uh, we were dealing with the deadlines, and we were pushing. There was a lot of pushback around it. And during the pandemic, we were just saying, no, the kid can turn it in all the way to the end of the first quarter, right? And I know, Rick, you may argue to the end of the first year, to the end of their educational life, right? Because you're always learning and growing. And that was a huge feat because, teachers say it's due on Monday. Kid would turn in on Tuesday, had it right, learned. And we would still say, but it was due on Monday. You know the story, Rick. I don't have to tell you. But
Yep, I've heard that.
there were some learnings that we had during the pandemic that, it is so important that we don't forget. Um, and looking at what is it we're not going back to. That's one of the things we're not going back to. And we saw the value in it. And teachers in the beginning were like, oh my goodness, everybody's going to turn in their assignments all at the same time. And that's not what we saw. Why?
Right.
Why? Because teachers were a lot more intentional about placing structures in place to support students through that entire process. Everything wasn't due. Everything can be turned into the end, but you had a due date here. If you missed the due date, we will continue to support you to get there. What did you need and all this other stuff? And then we got it in. So at the end, it wasn't like overwhelming. And that was the big fear. And sometimes those fears end up being the reason why we don't do things for kids because of the fear we have for the adults. And those fears sometimes aren't even realized. We haven't even experienced them. We're making them up in our heads.
Oh,
So,
spot on. You're exactly right.
good stuff. Good stuff.
So, as this school year came to a wrap, I don't know of any educators or administrators that weren't ready for it to end. However, I do believe that there were some great things that we learned through this last school year, just about education in general. And so I would love for a minute just to kind of switch our thoughts onto what were some of the positives that came out of this. So, Phyllis, I would love to come over to you. What are some of the new capabilities or the skills that students might have developed over these past 18 months?
I think that Rick made a really good point when he talked about the importance of helping kids retain hope and optimism and feel like they can be successful and they can accomplish all of their goals: academic, social, interpersonal, emotional. And one of the things that I think has come out of this pandemic is the renewed emphasis, or maybe the first time we've emphasized social emotional wellness, that we have prioritized kids' well-being, that we've really fully recognized that kids cannot show up or be available to learn if they are stressed, if they're anxious about a sick family member, if they're worried that their parent has lost their job, if they're taking care of younger siblings. And I think that that's something that we in the past have had an easier time just kind of casting aside. Well, maybe there are some kids who have got extra stuff going on. In this particular period of time, everyone had something going on. That was true for absolutely everybody to different degrees, but it was true for everybody. And so rather than focusing on learning loss, which is that deficits perspective and strips away hope, strips away optimism, instead of talking about learning loss, I'd like to talk about all of the things that kids have gained. And I know from the students I work with, a lot of them heightened their self-awareness quite a bit. They learned the kinds of people they want to hang out with, the kinds of people who fill their bucket, make them feel good about themselves. I had one student tell me that they really appreciated for the first time that there wasn't one single friend who could meet all of their needs, which meant there wasn't one single perfect person. And maybe that meant they didn't need to be perfect either, because they had to actually pull from different buckets. They had the friend who made them laugh, the friend who was good at keeping a secret, the friend who was good at having fun, maybe not so good at keeping a secret, and then just assembling a really robust support network for themselves, and also recognize how important that support network was, how important connection was, whether they were an introvert or an extrovert, so to different degrees for different kids, and how important those family connections were. And getting to see a grandparent who maybe you haven't seen in a very long time because of the pandemic. So the takeaway for me has to do with character development, self-awareness, reprioritizing, shifting the emphasis from grades and achievement to really more enduring, important elements that lead to a happy life. And that is kind of, I won't say a silver lining because I hate that expression, but it's at least a shade of gray in the midst of a lot of loss and pain over the last 18 months.
So as we wrap this up, I would love to just hear from each of you really quickly. How can we use this moment of being reunited with our students and then with each other to strengthen as not only individuals, but also as a community?
I can start, and I'll just start with I just a firm believer as a principal. You don't have to wait until the district says it's okay, or you don't have to wait until your entire school community is on board, because you'll be waiting forever for sometimes for both of those to happen. But when you've identified that this is important for kids, and you have just a few teachers who are willing to go in and take that risk, look at those policies, look at those practices, and start to change them. And even though those policies and practices may not change overnight in terms of their implementation, it's a place to start, right? And as a principal, that's oftentimes what I'm looking at. I'm looking at what are the structures, what are the policies, what are the practices that are creating this culture that kids may feel unsafe, that are producing these type of grades, and what is it that we need to do? So, I think looking at where you stand, whatever your position of power is, and identifying that circle of influence for yourself, and identifying how do you move that, right? How do you move within that space to impact your kids, but not your teacher? And for me, as a principal of the school, and even as a principal of my district, right? Because I'm also having conversations above me, and and I really do mean above me, as well as with me, right? When I talk about our teachers and our colleagues, so identifying that space and then moving within that. Again, connecting with those parents, connecting with our students, and connecting with our staff, and knowing that is what makes up that school community, right? It's not just the teachers, it's not just the students, but it's all of it, right? For our students to be successful, you need all of those different parts, and really working in that space to make those things happen.
And
Stop right there.
I agree with all of that, and to really just take care of one another. Staff take care of staff. Staff look out for administrators. Usually I always feel bad for principals. They're kind of an island at the top, and often they're carrying the whole burden, and no one is worrying about them. But
So
to have students look out for fellow students, there's a lot of programs like SOS. There's mental health first aid, but to really have everybody pausing to get out of themselves long enough, because I think we've all gone inward for about 18 months, and really be other looking to check in with your friends, check in with your colleagues, check in with people who work at other schools who you happen to know, but really to look out for one another and try to avoid having anybody fall through the cracks, help them get the support they might need. I don't think that it's going to be an easy transition back. I think we're going to see a lot of people who struggle, or maybe a lot of people who are struggling all along, but finally allow themselves to collapse now that really immediate threat has passed for them. And it's going to be a slog to get everybody back in operational, back in working order. And I think just being kind to one another and including everyone. On the parent side, one of the things that was really helpful from my school was to have parent education events, to give opportunities to meet whatever the specific needs were that the parents were expressing that they were worrying about with their kids. And again, going back to the idea of upriver to the anxiety, recognizing that at the root of everybody's functioning, it's about fear, it's about anxiety, and doing what we can to recognize that our fear might be different than someone else's fear, but it's all equally valid. And we can support our colleagues, they can support us. And by doing that, we'll also support our students, who will very much need their adults to be in good working order, because emotions are completely contagious.
Yeah, and I would add, I mean, I love your idea about the parents getting together. We do that every quarter, where we just invite parents who want to take time off work. So it's the middle of the day and there's one in the evening for those who can't make it. And the teachers just sit in a room with parents and we're all in a circle and we just talk about it because there's no owner's manual. And the parents often leave crying, but in camaraderie. They said, I thought we were alone. I didn't realize this, and that we have a community. And some of us tear up too. It's such a neat coming together. It's so powerful to realize that there's a camaraderie. So to pay attention to that mental health, I agree with that. I would also remind everybody to take it really slow. This is not a race. It's a journey, and that we walk the path together. Together we will rise, but not accusatory and, not putting the pressure on to do things, but take very small steps as you come back. And that, oh gosh, there was one thing that James was saying I wanted to add to. I forgot, but I'll just close with this. I think that people think that they have to go from 0 to 60 in the very first 2 weeks. And Arthur Ashe, who is a HIV civil rights activist, a tennis champion, and so on, he has got that phrase, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but it was something with, it was 3 short little sentences, and it helps me get through these really difficult times. It helps me find, if you're principled behind something, you have courage of conviction, you find stamina. So I think looking at our principles and saying, this is my calling is actually gonna be really helpful, is do it. But he said that can be overwhelming. And it was something like, start where you are, use what you have, and I guess it was I'm mixing up the other one, but the last part was, I guess, start where you are. Something else is very simple. So in the microcosm of your class, can you do these small things without waiting for the whole school district to kind of lumberingly turn around and appreciate this? And doing that and then giving testimony about what that feels like to your colleagues is going to be really, really helpful. And then we want to put those things in place, but be really, really simple, like small steps. Like you might want to get trained on anxiety and depression or something and try one idea per month for like 2 years. That's how slow I'm talking, and forgive yourself. If you do it most of the time, sleep guilt-free at night and get that rest. That's so powerfully important to your success when you're actually there in the classroom, and extend that to, of course, your colleagues. I would offer that as a way. Oh, I know what I was going to say. There's so many things that we do in the classroom that kids can do on their own, through technology. And so the lens I would suggest to teachers to celebrate the humanity that we're now coming back, try to do lessons, interactive experiences, learning, whatever it is, that are only things you can do when you are gathered together in that room, not things they can do on their own. And shift that emphasis with the flipped classroom or the new tutorials that are online, but truly celebrate. These are things we can only do when we gather together in our common synergy, so to speak, building the give and take, after we build off each other's ideas, not stuff that, hey, they could do individually. And I think that will help get people excited about what they do in the classroom again. Thanks for letting me weave my way through that. So I finally found it again.
Well, real quick, Rick, you remind me of a African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And we know this is a collective business. This is a collab. This is not a solo mission that we have embarked upon. So yeah, when you talked about the need to go slow, right? It goes with going together, right?
Well, and then
great point.
that other African proverb, I see you. You know, the way that we would greet. I think children want to be seen, and colleagues. So I see all that is you, rather than classifying you over there. I see the genuine you. I think will go a long way.
Love that. I love both those proverbs.
I also definitely agree with the going slow, especially right here with going back into the classroom again. Really having teachers really take their time in developing those relationships with students, and really taking their time in going back over those essential social skills that our students have lost through the pandemic, and really forming all of that so the rest of your school year will be that positive experience for those students. I think without those relationships, it's going to be a real struggle, unfortunately. So, James, Phyllis, and Rick, thank you guys so much for this conversation. It was amazing. Thank you also to everyone who's joined us here today. This webinar has been recorded. It will be emailed to you so that you can rewatch or share the content with your colleagues. A quick reminder also that we'll be answering your questions in just a few minutes over at our Teacher Life Facebook group to chat with other teachers about the transition back to school this fall. Also, don't forget, we're going to be available to chat on Twitter as well. Just head over to @TeachStarter. Thank you again. All the best, and we hope to see you at future webinars.